I think it is time to start. My name is Anna Felt. I'm heading the Women's Empowerment Principal Secretariat, and I'm very excited about today's conversation. We will have a brief presentation of the recently launched Transparency and Accountability Framework for our web signatories. And then we will have a conversation with three web signatories that have done great work uh, linked to accountability and transparency from different perspectives. And then we will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So we have chosen this topic, as many of you are aware. We've been using the WEPs gap analysis tool for a few years as a self-assessment tool. And I think that at this point in time, a lot of things are changing, and there is more pressure, I think, from everyone to be more transparent and show progress towards gender equality. So from our side, from UN Women and UN Global Compact, we've been working on this transparency and accountability framework that we are now asking companies to step up and show what they've been doing to implement the women's empowerment principles. And you will learn a little bit about that today. We go with the slogan, what gets measured gets done. And we will hear that from all of our speakers today, that they've been able to not only make progress, but know where they stand vis-a-vis gender equality. We have currently over 4,600 web signatories, and I think 10% of them have already stepped up and been given some indication of what they're doing on three indicators, which is the percentage of women in their companies, women in leadership, and women on boards. But we would like to take a step further to go into some other indicators that really can be transformative for companies and for women and men working in those companies and in their supply chain. We will be recording this session, and we will be posting it on the website. And we will, apologies, we will post it on the WEPs website, and also disseminate it in the next WEPs newsletter, so that everyone can take advantage of this conversation today and the insights from our signatories that will be part of the conversation. So I will hand it over to my colleague Diana Raniola to take us through briefly what this transparency and accountability framework is about. And then we will go into an exciting conversation with our representative from Relics, Swedbank, and FinDev Canada. So over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Anna, and it's so great to be in here, and really excited to hear about this conversation on transparency and accountability. But before we do that, we're just going to give a very short presentation on the Women's Empowerment Principles. I know that most of you who are WEP signatories are familiar with the WEPs, but we're just going to give a slight overview. And there are 7 principles, as you know, that are a framework for for how it is that how companies can promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace, and leadership. And through the 7 principles, that's how they kind of like, I guess, they're kind of like that's how they're made up. So WEPS 1 is on leadership, which is on women on boards, executive leadership, and senior management. Principles 2 to 4 are focused on the workplace. What do companies do to help treat women and men fairly in the workplace? And then there's also like ensuring the health, safety, and well-being of women, and also promoting education, training, and promotion of women at the workplace. And then WEPS 5, or Principle 5, focuses on the marketplace, which is, how do companies interact with their suppliers, and what do they need to do to ensure that your marketing and supply chains help empower women. Web 6 focuses on the community, which is on advocacy and other community initiatives that promote gender equality. And lastly, it's on transparency, which is on reporting and measuring the results. And that is the focus of today's presentation. The WEP's journey is what guides the companies, or what most companies go through as they go from the moment that they learn about the WEPs to the time that they implement and to the time that they report. And while there are like 6 phases in here, like companies can be there like at different times, or how do I say this? It's like companies could be there at like different stages, and they may not happen simultaneously, but like these are more or less what are the things that you go through. First step is to consider, or the first phase, where companies learn about the WEPs and are interested to sign it and what it is about, what are the eligibility criteria to be part of the WEPs, to be a WEP signatory. And then the next is to sign, which is to sign the CEO statement of support. The third one is an activating, which is about really what are some of the processes that companies can do to start really implementing the WEPs, and that's usually through the action plan. Most of you would have heard by now of or most of us are familiar of the gender gap analysis tool, which is a very useful self-assessment so that companies can know where they are. 18 questions to help you determine what it is that you need to do to help you determine what the next steps are and how to frame your action plan. The fourth step, or the fourth phase, is on engage. And this is kind of like where companies start to work with other stakeholders, external, whether it's with other WEP signatories, to their suppliers, or their community. So this, in a way, is like WEP's principles 5 and 6. And then the phase 5 is on sustaining, and this is where companies start working on their key performance indicators. So while ideally at the activate phase, companies would have determined what are some of the indicators, we do sometimes note that it's also like some would have to come up with the activities first and then determine the KPIs later. But basically, through sustain, through the monitoring of the work and tracking, this is kind of like how we know where the progress is, what are the ways into which what are the some of the things that have been done that have been successful, and what are some of the things that do need improvement. And finally, on reporting, which is where we report, or where companies report on the progress made on indicators. And now we have it on the weps.org, a platform where you can actually report on these indicators. And then lastly, there's reactivate, which kind of like shows the journey continues, and it's a continuous process. And just so you know that there are different tools that are available to guide you throughout the WEP's journey. Moving along, these are like the indicators that we have recently launched. So there are 8 essential indicators, and these are basically the indicators that measure sustainable change towards gender equality. And these are the things, if you're a WEP signatory and are approved and have created your company profile page, you can actually now start reporting on these online, whether publicly or privately. And this is voluntary, of course, but just so you know that they're there, there's a means to do that. And then there are, of course, like 8 complementary indicators, which are indicators that measure key areas to tackle systemic barriers to gender equality, noting that these may vary according to country, industry, and company size. There are 27 input and support measures, indicators, which basically tracks policies, practices, and measures that are available to help achieve gender equality and women's empowerment. And then there are lastly 24 additional indicators, which are a little bit more like disaggregated, and while useful to have, we just want to focus on the focus really, for at least for the reporting platform, is on the 8 essential indicators. So here we are over here, we've listed them down. These are available in the WEP's brochure, which was published on Friday last week. And it basically shows like the percentage of women and men employees in senior management positions, on boards, etc., etc. The first 7, these are basically outcome-based indicators, which shows the percentage of women and men, the disaggregation of the information and whatnot. And then the last one is really more a question on whether there's a procedure on responding to allegations of sexual harassment and violence. So this is how it looks like on the company profile page if you wish to report it, just to kind of see. As you can see, like there's some way to kind of like report which ones you'd like to put out publicly or privately. And it's pretty straightforward. And lastly, these are just like some of the sources that we have and the WEPs brochure, and we hope that you will access them so that it can help you with implementing the WEPs. And with that, I would like to turn over back to Anna, so that we can start with the discussion.
Thank you so much, Diana. And I think that was a great overview on where we are today on the WEPs journey and the resources that we put together. So I would like to introduce our three WEP signatories. We have Marcia Balisciano, who is the founding global head of corporate responsibility at RELEX. We have Mikael Nyström, who is the head of compensation and benefits at Swedbank. And we have Anne-Marie Levesque, who is the head of gender and impact at FinDev Canada. And they all three have a story to tell. So if we switch off the screen share, then I'd like to ask Marcia first to talk a little bit about what prompted RELEX to start collecting gender statistics and data disaggregated by sex. You're muted. Okay, I think there is a sound issue. So let's see if we can maybe start with Mikael, responding to the same question. What prompted Swedbank to start collecting this data?
So I hope you hear me. Will it work?
Yes.
Perfect. Yes. So how did our journey start? There are several aspects to that. One being that we are a bank located in Sweden and Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and Baltics. And in Sweden, we have half of all our employees. So that's our major country of employment. And in Sweden, we have a long history of legal requirement to actually measure and report on equal salaries. This has been a legal requirement for quite some time, and it was a requirement to happen every third year. Our board of directors and the group executive committee, although were in agreement that we needed to move faster and we need to have a more frequent control on this as well, to take appropriate actions when needed. So it was a decision taken to set up targets both in terms of equal salaries and also improve the gender equal representation and increase diversity, to define targets for the entire company, as well as use targets for each of the business areas in the bank going forward. So we needed a good model to measure this and to be able to do it more frequently. When you do it every third year, it becomes very much like a project. It's like a new start every time you do it, so to say. It takes time and effort, and you tend to lose a bit of a momentum when you're not doing it on a regular basis. So by setting up a more solid data structure and to do this more frequently, that speeds up the process for us and really brings more value to the whole process of measuring this, following it up.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And we'll go back to Marcia if you can unmute. But I think it's a great point that it's not just a one-off, or every time there's a requirement after 3 years that you start a new project to collect the data, but the continuum actually helps you drive not only results, but knowing where you are on the journey. So thanks for that. Marcia?
Yes, well, thank you very much for this opportunity to present alongside my distinguished panelists. We're really passionate about the WEPs because it's created for us a, way of charting our progress on gender equality. And let me just say that Relics, we think of ourselves as the world's knowledge company, and we have 33,000 employees operating in 40 countries around the world. And we're committed to universal sustainable access to information and using our resources and skills to make a positive impact on society. And we have an inclusion policy which commits us to having a diverse workforce and an environment that respects all individuals. So it's got to be a place where women can thrive. And in order to understand how we are doing that, we've got to have the data. Anna, as you said, if you don't measure, then you really can't make progress. So we need those baselines. And one of the things that we have tried to do is to integrate a way of tracking data on a real time basis into our HR information system so that managers can get access to that information when they need it. So we do that based on age, gender, seniority in the business, their function, by country, by ethnicity. So it also integrates attrition so that we can see what's happening in terms of those types of metrics. And it's helped us to know that we don't have to wait till we get to the end of the year to measure our progress. We really should be looking at this throughout time. Just to kind of set the baseline for where we are, we're 51% women, 43% managers who are women, and we are 31% senior women in leadership, and we have 45% women on the board. So the 31%, we've been kind of constant at that level over the last few years, and so that's a really big push for us. And I think the focus on measurement goes along with setting our aspirations. And for the first time last month, in our corporate responsibility report, we set a new suite of inclusion goals for the organization. And this includes on gender to increase the percentage of women in management, senior leadership, and technology roles continually over time. And as I heard one of my colleagues from the Global Compact India say last week, we should be aiming to get to planet 50-50.
Thank you so much. And Anne-Marie, you come at it from a little different perspective. So, of course, you are a web signatory as FinDev Canada, but you also use the Women's Empowerment Principles as a tool. So how did you get started on this?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. That's a great question, and a pleasure to be here today with you. So FinDev Canada is Canada's bilateral development finance institution. So we invest in private sector companies in the emerging markets of Latin America, the Caribbean, and sub-Saharan Africa, with a view to generate impact. So we come at it from the investor perspective, as well as web signatories ourselves. And when FinDev Canada was founded in 2018, from the get-go, we had a clear mandate to invest to generate impact on women's economic empowerment. And shortly after our creation, we actually joined and were founding members of the 2X Challenge, which started as an initiative of the development finance institutions of the G7 countries to commit and mobilize unprecedented amounts of capital to invest in women. So very early on, with all these clear goals and mandates and challenges that we took on, the question was going to be, all right, so how will we know that we have an impact, or how will we measure our impact? So this is where data really takes all its importance. And as an investor, it has this interesting particularity that it's not only about our data, but it's also, of course, through our investees' data. A lot of our data collection and impact monitoring depends on our investees' capacity to track these indicators. So that's the perspective that we bring and how we work with our investees. And I can talk more to this later. But another thing I wanted to mention, how we come at it from an investor perspective, is, of course, on the impact side. But frankly, on the business performance side as well, as an investor, we want our client companies, our investees to be successful. And we've seen firsthand, and I've seen firsthand in my previous experiences, how good data, including on gender, can be a driver of good business performance. Marcia alluded earlier to data around retention, attrition, pay gap, salaries. This can all lead to business decisions and have an impact on the bottom line. If you have an attrition problem, this results in additional cost for your business. So we are firm believers in the fact that good data, including on gender dynamics within the business, is just good business, full stop.
That was a good point there, Anne-Marie. So going back to you, Marcia, and if you could tell us a little bit more maybe on the dashboard that you are allowing you to see the progress lifetime, and how that has been helping you to drive this progress. You already mentioned these great figures of for 51% women, I think you said, in the company, and 43% of women in leadership. So can you tell a little bit more about the dashboard that you're using to measure this?
Yeah, well, we also kind of need to dig into the data. We are a business that employs about 9,000 technologists. As you saw in that goal I mentioned, to increase the number of women in technology, we're also tracking that as well. How many women in tech do we have? And as of last year, we were about 26% women in tech. So, that's a point on the map, but we need to be able to increase that. And so we've been working very closely with our strategy team as well on the dashboard, and also to use that data to give us forecasts. What happens if we do nothing? Where are we going to be in 5 years' time? What happens if we move around with the metrics? What happens if we can increase our recruitment? And what happens if we promote? How many women would we need to promote to get to 40% or get to 35%? So looking, doing this kind of modeling so that we can be aware, doing nothing is going to just give us the status quo. So what kinds of steps do we need to take? The other thing to say is that I work at the group level, but we're 4 businesses. We have Elsevier, which focuses on advancing science and health, LexisNexis Risk Solutions Group, which is focused on protection of society, reducing inequalities through data. We have LexisNexis Legal and Professional, which is focused on advancing the rule of law and access to justice. And we also have one of the world's largest exhibitions businesses in Reed Exhibitions, where we focus on fostering communities. And so we have to be able to break the numbers down. We need to see it in the aggregate. But I can tell you that, by having this data, it creates really great conversations. I had a chance to talk with our management team last week. Our head of strategy was picking up this theme before Christmas and talking with our CEOs. And so it's having the data allows them to see what's happening in their business. And we know that some parts of the business are moving at a faster pace, and others will come along as well. But that allows them to set individual goals so that in the aggregate, we raise where we are today with where we want to be in the longer term.
Great. No, thanks for that. And thanks for adding the dimension of forecasting and what if you do nothing versus what if you take action, and what different outcomes will you get from that. And I think it's data is also a starting point for conversations. So we are not here to say that everybody has to start on a perfect level. I think all of you have great numbers to share, but that's not the point. The point is to actually know where you are on the journey and be able to assess where you're heading, and forecasting is a part of that. So Mikkel, back to you. You have a different tool that is the job evaluation system that systematically and regularly evaluates the content of each job. to understand what makes roles comparable and how equal pay can be measured. So can you talk a little bit more about that? I think that gets deeper into one of the issues that we are trying to tackle in the workplace.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to work more regularly on this topic to compare salaries and look at the pay gap. We also wanted to use a common approach for this across all our home markets. I mentioned earlier that we had a Swedish legal requirement as a background, but we wanted to apply the same approach on all 4 home markets. So we established a common job catalog, a common structure to categorize the jobs, to level the jobs, to make them comparable, so we know what jobs are compared to what. The whole model is based on predefined criteria. So, the way you look at jobs, what are the requirements to perform the jobs, what are the responsibilities in the jobs, and so on. So different factors to clearly define what the job is and at what level the job is. So when we established that foundation, we had this data in place for all our employees in the HR system. The other part is the importance of getting a process in place and the knowledge out throughout the organization to actually work with this and keep this up to date on a regular basis. The organization changes constantly. There are new jobs coming up, there are jobs changing, there are new employees coming in, employees leaving. So we have quite a lively set of data that we need to make sure is up to date and correct at all times. So every time we do look at the data and draw conclusions, we can trust the data and that it's correct. So the responsibility put out on all of the organization to really work with this and have knowledge in this was one important part of it. Kind of a decentralized process and ownership set up. Also, when we then had this in place, we do run regular reports and also have KPIs set up for each of the members of the management team. So there are targets and there are reports that are followed up on a regular basis throughout the year. So as soon as you can see that there are actions that needs to be taken, that the trends are moving in the wrong direction and so on, you can more easily look through the data and see what may be causing this and what actions do we need to mitigate this and actually close whatever gaps that may occur, because this is not something we do and then we're done and ready and then we can close it. It's a constant process, and as I said, everything is changing constantly in a way. So as soon as we have a reorganization or we employ a lot of people or people go and so on, that there is always different results at all times coming out. So we monitor the trends, we analyze the results and see what actions we need to take, and then also when we do take actions, we can follow up and see what were the results and was it what we expected, and how do we adjust actions going forward to get the result we're really looking for.
Great. No, thank you so much. And I think it's a good point to just point that out, that there's a lot of moving parts, new people coming in, new roles being shaped, and others that might be obsolete, and how do you deal with that? So thanks. Anne-Marie, back to you in terms of the KPIs that you're trying to hold your investees to account. And do you see that there's progress made because of this requirement?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question for a young DFI like us, because we're only about 3 years old, not even 3 years old. And most of our investments actually happened in 2019, 2020. And on an annual reporting basis, we're only starting to get the first most substantive results back. But So it might be a bit early to talk about change on the long term scale, but what we're seeing is quite interesting. Um, so I think our in terms of our approach and what kind of core KPIs we chose to focus on, for us it was important to be quite focused. So because we have ideally we'd collect data on hundreds of data points, and we'd be able to run cross analyses and all of that, but we landed on a few core KPIs that we thought, okay, so these are the ones that we really need to track across the portfolio, not only for us to measure our impact, but also to encourage and track investees' performance on these core dimensions of women's economic empowerment, which is our focus. And these are closely aligned with the 2X criteria indicators. So for all our investees, and they're actually quite similar to many of the essential indicators in the new WEPs reporting framework. So the share of women on boards, in senior leadership, across all employees. Given our sectors of operation, we also look at the share of women on investment committees in the case of the private equity industry. And also when we have client-facing or consumer-facing investees, we also ask them to track the share of women within the customers or consumers of their business, and that particularly applies to financial services, amongst others. We also look at, amongst our core KPIs, we have some more qualitative indicators, which we use to get a sense of the investees, the client's intention, the intentionality to influence change within their business on gender equality. So we look at if the client has any goals or strategies, action plans, do they have targets on gender equality, or are they willing to adopt some? Because it's equally important to us. It's perfectly fine if the client perhaps is not there yet, but with our help, they're willing to commit and to improve. So that's important to us. And we also look at the capacity. So does the investee have someone within the business who can take this on? Who can take this work forward? Are they willing to commit resources to it? So this tells us, this we feel gives us a good baseline portrait of the situation at the company. But then it really depends. Going from there, we really try to meet the client where they are, and we have seen some cases where the client is quite advanced in their data collection, so we can go deeper along some of the other essential KPIs of the WEPs framework, like the salary gap, like the promotion rates, like the attrition rates, and that always yields very, very interesting results. In some cases, given the markets where we work, given also sometimes the complexities, I mentioned private equity, sometimes we work through intermediaries. So the data is actually not even our investees, it's our investees. So how do we deal with that added layer of complexity? Sometimes we have to be patient and work with the client to set up a data collection system that works for them and their business strategy and operations. And as an investor, we understand that it's also on us to help and support clients building such systems and tracking that data. So that's why we can use resources like technical assistance funding. And for us, impactful data is one of the core pillars of our technical assistance practice. So we really look forward to pilot it. It's quite new, our technical assistance facility. So we look forward to piloting that feature of impactful data with clients very soon. And one thing I wanted to mention that we've observed is an interesting trend is sometimes clients might be a bit reluctant or might be a bit uncomfortable, or they don't know what will happen if they share some of this data with us, and really and I totally get that, but really our approach, and I know it's the same for other 2X members and with the WEPs framework as well, is that it's not about finding problems. We're not asking this data to see where the problems are or to try to find negative trends, and then say no to the investment or have some negative consequences to that. The goal is really to just understand where they are, and it's not necessarily about where you are; it's where you want to go. And I think someone mentioned this earlier. To set these goals and understand where you're going, you first need to know what's in your company, what's in your portfolio, what's the current state. So it's really this approach that we're taking, which is about the transformation. Really, at the end of the day, it's about the change that you want to promote within your business as an investor within your portfolio. So we really look at it from that perspective.
No, thank you. And I think if you have any examples of how it has illuminated some of this work, both positive and negative, if you have something to add on that.
Yeah, well, we just had recently a very interesting experience. Like I said, it's all very new, but and I think it's Michael who mentioned, sometimes the trend maybe doesn't go the way we'd like it to go, but it's still a very interesting data point, and it can be very informative for the business. So we recently came across an example. It's an agribusiness investee in Latin America, and when the impact reporting came back, we saw that there was a slight decrease in the share of women employees. And so, okay, what happened? And then we realized that it was because they had switched crops. So they used to focus on a more berry type of crop. I think it was grapes. So the picking was very different than the new crop, which was a tree-based crop, so higher up, a different kind of physical labor. And what the company told us is that they heard from women workers that they didn't want to do these jobs. They preferred to work on other crops that the company also had. So that was it prompted very interesting questions. Okay, so then what about this particular job or this particular crop or picking technique makes this difficult for women or not as appealing for women? Are there any improvements, whether it's about the training that is provided, the technique that is employed, or maybe some equipment that could make this work easier, not just for women but for everybody? I think, at least in my experience, improvements that are perhaps originate from a gender equity perspective end up benefiting everybody. So it could also make it easier for men and less demanding physically for men to do this type of work. So, like I said, we just found out about this. We still need to see with the company what they want to do with this information. But I think it's a good case of, even if the trend isn't going in the direction perhaps they expected, it's still yielding some very interesting trends and results, which have very practical implications for the business.
And I think this type of data can also give some indication of where innovation is required, as you just mentioned.
Exactly.
And in similar cases in the fishery sector, for example, where it's a lot of heavy labor, and it could just be tweaked with a much easier lever for that women and other men that might not be the ones that have been working on the fisher boats it opens up for more diversity and more inclusion of the labor market. So I think that these are interesting and important questions to be asked. So Marcia, do you have any, maybe not similar example, but an example that has illuminated your situation in RELX as a result of the data?
Well, actually, I would just want to pick up the point that you mentioned about innovation, because I think it's really incumbent on all the companies, wherever they are on the journey, and it's a journey for us as it is for other companies, to look at where your expertise lies and how you can maximize the positive impact on gender equality through the knowledge and skills that you have. So for us, because we're about content and data, last year we put out our third gender report, and listeners can find that on the free RELX SDG Resource Center. It's called The Researcher Journey Through a Gender Lens. And among the findings is that in every country over a 5-year period that we looked at, on average, women researchers author fewer publications than men, regardless of what authorship position that they have. And another really striking statistic for me was about a proxy for innovation on patents. So during the period 2012 to 2016, women inventors and assignees appeared on patents less than men in every country that we looked at. And among inventors, the average number of patents that men apply for range from about 1.1 times more than women to up to 1.5 times more. And then in some cases, just on women assignees related to patents. In one European country, in particular, the Netherlands, men applied for patents 3.1 times more than women. So what I'm citing here is that we're about data and analytics, and so we're using this expertise to share knowledge of other women's journeys. I also just want to flag that for International Women's Day last week, through the RELX SDG Resource Center, we made about 60 pieces of content available that highlight different aspects of women and research. And I actually had a chance to do an interview with Dr. Marianne Legato, which you can find in that right from the homepage. And she's a world leading expert on looking at gender specific medicine. So this is an example of something that we're really passionate about, and hopefully other companies have something to contribute similarly by using their expertise to share information or help to move the agenda forward. So I think this is a good example of looking at what the data shows, but then it's incumbent on us. These are where the gaps are. We also have to be part of the solution. So some examples of that, like at Elsevier, the Elsevier Foundation partners with the Organization for Women in Science for the Developing World. And in 2021, we had awards recognizing a number of early career women scientists from 20 developing countries. So by showcasing them, by showcasing their work, this is a way of us trying to bridge that gap. And there's lots of other great examples. I'll just mention one more, that we're a disseminating partner for the We Empower SDG Challenge, which is celebrating women entrepreneurs, which the UN Global Compact has been, and the WEPs have been supportive of. And again, it's just highlighting and showcasing and supporting the work of women entrepreneurs who are helping to change the world, where they are.
Thank you for bringing up this example and for really emphasizing the importance of business being part of the solution. I think this is very much what the Women's Empowerment Principles are about, because it covers both workplace, internal issues, the marketplace, and the community, and how we can create that holistic approach to gender equality and women's empowerment. So Mikael, over to you if you have any example of how this data has illuminated gender equality or gender inequalities on your side.
I'll refer to what Anne-Marie was into earlier, that kind of learn a lot of, you learn from mistakes or you learn from bad trends, but generally you do learn a lot when we have the data in place and we can follow it up on a regular basis. I think we moved more from trying to close the gaps to better understanding of what can cause the gaps and what actions do we need to take on those areas. How do we work with recruitments or promotions and all of these decisions that are taken that actually affects the data and will eventually result in a pay gap if there are any unbiased decisions taken or other factors. in those processes that kind of drives a possible pay gap. So it really gives us much more regular understanding of our organization, what happens, what changes are coming out of. And the other part, I think, is the accountability to the entire organization, the distributed accountability where everyone out there can feel the responsibility of this topic together, that we are on top of this at all times. Another thing that is related to this is that we took the entire model of data with the job evaluation and what type of jobs every employee had and what level their job was, and made it visible to all the employees, so they know what classification they have, what the job is. We also took the salary ranges and made them visible to all of the employees, so they can see the same information as the managers can see, and evaluating both the job and the salary for the job. So it gives us the possibility to move forward and make these changes as well. So I think there's a lot of good consequences of putting all of this in place.
Yeah, no, thanks for also adding the dimension of transparency. So it is also to involve stakeholders such as employees to know where they are in the system and how different jobs are classified. So I think that's a very good point on the transparency. I wanted to check if there are any questions from participants before we go into our last questions on some recommendations for everyone. I've seen that I would like to thank Odd and Megan from Global Compact that have diligently put some great links along with your conversations. So we have the case studies from both Relics and Swedbank on the chat box. There has been a few questions in relation to the transcript, and as mentioned earlier, we will be putting it out on WEPs.org, the conversation. And we also have, of course, our WEPs brochure that lays out the transparency and accountability framework in more detail. I wonder if there's any other questions at this point. Otherwise, I'd like to move to the last questions for the three panelists about recommendations to other companies. What would you suggest, either somebody embarking completely fresh on this today, or somebody that has already a few data points being collected, but any recommendations that you have to participants and anyone else who will be listening to this conversation? Who would like to start? I think, Marcia, you look that you have a good recommendation lined up.
Well, just what I was saying before, we definitely don't have all the answers, and we want to continue to improve. But one bit of experience, so I lead our corporate responsibility function, and we started on inclusion 10 years ago. But it wasn't until we actually got more colleagues involved. And one of the ways that we did this, I mean, obviously employee resource groups are incredible, and our Women's Connected networks. And but when we actually went to senior leadership and when we went to other parts of the business, like engaging with our procurement colleagues on developing a inclusive supplier program, which focuses on women-owned businesses as well as other businesses by underrepresented suppliers. It's not. It means that it's not linear anymore. It's going to be more challenging because there's a lot more stakeholders that are going to be involved. But the result is ultimately better because more people feel engaged and more people buy in. And so I think having the conversations throughout the organization and recognizing that where we are today doesn't have to be where we want to be in the future. So it's been exciting And we just want to continue to raise that bar higher as we go.
Thank you. Anne-Marie?
Well, I think the first thing I would just, re-emphasize, remember, it's not about where you are, it's where you're going. So don't be afraid to see what comes up or to dig deeper into the data. Also, I guess, it might be obvious, but invest in a good system. So some of the things that we're seeing, so sometimes companies or investees will have the data, but they might not be able to cross-reference it, or so they might have the data on the share of women as, let's say, for a financial institution, women who receive loans, and they might have data on non-performing loans, but not gender disaggregated, so they can't see if there are any gender trends there. So it's really worth thinking about this as early as you can. From someone who's really starting, I know it can be overwhelming, which indicators to choose, what do we have to track? And the good thing is that there's already a lot of resources out there, and there's a lot of efforts on the parts of many organizations like development finance institutions, like the 2X Challenge, like UN Women and the WEPs framework, to harmonize some of those definitions and that data. So there's a lot of information online. The WEPs resource is a great one. I'll put in the chat a bit later the links to the 2X Challenge resources, so that might be a good place to start. And yeah, good rule of thumb, I think, is when in doubt, disaggregate the data. If it's about people and you have the opportunity to do it, disaggregate. Try to see if you can collect gender disaggregated data, because you might find some interesting trends and insights for your business.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up, Anne-Marie, about correlating different data points. What I observed in one web signatory was that they had data on the promotions of the year and also on the performance reviews. And the trend was that the performance reviews were women had generally better reviews, but didn't get the promotions. So those are the kind of findings that you can get if you start correlating the data as well. So not just collecting them linearly, but try to see the trends from different aspects. So
exactly.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing that in. Mikkel, do you have any recommendations for us?
I think I've maybe been into it before, but so maybe sounds like I'm a bit repetitive. But really establish a process that involves the entire organization, and to make sure that everyone is well informed and knows about the whole process and this topic. It's because you need to maintain the data, at least if we're talking about the type of data we have been managing now. Then it needs to be maintained. It's easy to run a project and put this in place, and then it doesn't age well, so to say. So that's one part of it, and the ownership out in the organization as well on the outcome of it, and taking actions when there are actions needed and the results are showing that there are improvements that needs to be made. So the ownership all the way from the top down to every single manager and possibly the employee as well.
Great. No, I think thanks for that, Mikkel. It's important to really emphasize the systematic collection of data, and it's not a one-off, and have a system that really supports is very, very important. So thanks everyone for your feedback. I see also here on intersectionality is important. Marcia, do you want to say something about the intersectionality before we close?
Yeah, I think we can't lose sight of the different aspects of diversity, and ensuring that we're collecting a full suite of data. And one of the challenges that we have is that in some places it's really difficult to get that data, and we have to look at the ways that we can do that. So we have a big project that we are embarking on. It's going to be a multi-year project around self-identification. And we've recognized that, we could go out right away and just say, okay, in other markets, for example, in Europe, give us this information. But if we don't actually make the case about why it's important and we don't bring the organization along with us, we're going to get really paltry data back. So we really want to take our time and get this right so that we get a fuller picture. Related to sexual identity and on race and ethnicity and disability. So we really need to look at this as part of a full picture of the beautiful diversity that we have within our organization.
Thanks for adding that. So it is not only about women and men, but also who are those women and men, and make sure that the company really understand who are the employees and how can they be supported. And as we heard earlier, it can help start conversations on identifying different initiatives and programs that can really help the surfacing some of those issues. So thanks for that. I think we have come to the closing, and I would like to thank all of you. We will continue this conversation in April, so we will post information about the WEPs number 7, which focus on accountability and transparency. And we will have a webinar on the 7th of April that will focus on this topic as well, because it's very important, and I hope that everyone can continue thinking about these issues and taking action towards better collection of data on gender equality. I'd also like to thank once again the UN Global Compact team for having given us this opportunity. And also in terms of where do we start, where does a company start on the journey, is a good starting point with a gap analysis tool to really kind of get understanding on where you are, what policies do you have in place, and what can you be doing. And then once you are well on your journey, we expect you to come. It's no obligation, as Diana mentioned earlier, to report, but we really hope that we will foster transparency around this figure. And it's not about pointing at the negative, but just to show that you're a committed company that drives in towards gender equality and women's empowerment. So thanks, Anne-Marie, Mikael, and Marcia for adding all this wealth of experience to the conversation. And thanks to everyone that have participated.